Maya gripped the edge of the cold hospital bed, her knuckles turning white as the heart monitor's steady keep blipped erratically in the quiet ICU. Her husband, Min-jun, reached up with a hand that was trembling uncontrollably, his fingers cold against her warm skin. He pulled her down until his pale lips were inches from her ear, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. "Maya, forgive me," he rasped out, his voice barely a whisper that made her stomach drop into a bottomless pit. "There is someone else. She is in Seoul, and she is waiting. You cannot let her suffer." Before Maya could scream, before she could even ask who he was talking about, the monitor let out one long, unbroken tone, and Min-jun's hand went completely limp in hers. "Where are you watching this story from today? Please drop your city or country in the comments below, because we love connecting with our global family. If you are ready for a story that will make you question everything you think you know about love and loyalty, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because what Maya discovered next shook her entire world to its core. The silence in the hospital room after the flatline was deafening. Maya stood there completely frozen, staring down at the man she had loved for over 10 years. Min-jun was not just her husband. He was her rock, the brilliant Korean tech executive who had fought against his conservative family's objections to marry a black woman from Atlanta. They had built a beautiful, quiet life together, full of late-night conversations, shared dreams, and quiet support. When he was diagnosed with a terminal illness 6 months ago, Maya had put her entire career as an interior designer on hold, staying by his side through every painful chemotherapy session, every late-night fever, and every tearful conversation. She had sacrificed everything to make his final days comfortable, only for him to spend his very last breath telling her that he had been loving someone else. The next day, the rain poured heavily over Atlanta as family and friends gathered for Min-jun's funeral. Maya moved through the crowd like a ghost, feeling entirely detached from her own body. Min-jun's family stood on the opposite side of the chapel, their faces cold and distant, barely acknowledging Maya's presence just as they had done throughout her entire marriage. She felt a terrible mixture of heartbreak and rising anger. "How could he do this to me?" she thought, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Was our whole marriage a lie? Was he taking trips to Korea for business, or was he visiting another woman? As the service ended and the guests began to clear out, a tall Korean man in a tailored dark suit approached Maya. She recognized him immediately as Mr. Park, Min-jun's longtime personal attorney and closest confidant outside of his family. Mr. Park looked around nervously before reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a thick, sealed manila envelope. He pressed it into Maya's hands, his expression deeply troubled. "Maya, I am so sorry for your loss," he said, his voice soft and laced with genuine sadness. "Min-jun gave me strict instructions to give you this only after he passed away. He wanted you to have it, but he warned me that it would change everything you believed about him." Maya looked down at the heavy envelope in her hands, her heart racing against her ribs. "What is inside this, Mr. Park? Is this about the woman he mentioned before he died?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and desperation. Mr. Park swallowed hard and looked away for a brief moment before meeting her eyes again. "I cannot tell you what to do, Maya. But if you open that envelope, you will step onto a path that cannot be undone. Some truths are heavier than lies. Please be careful." With those final words, the attorney bowed respectfully and walked away, leaving Maya standing alone in the damp graveyard, holding the key to her husband's darkest secret. Later that night, Maya sat at her kitchen table in the quiet house that suddenly felt entirely too large. A single lamp illuminated the manila envelope resting in front of her. Her mind was a chaotic storm of emotions. Part of her wanted to throw the envelope into the fireplace and preserve the sweet memory of the husband who used to bring her coffee in bed every morning and call her his soulmate. But the deeper, aching part of her needed to know the truth. She needed to know who had stolen a piece of her husband's heart while she was giving him all of hers. With trembling fingers, Maya tore open the seal and tipped the contents onto the table. A thick stack of financial documents slid out, along with a small, worn leather-bound notebook. Maya picked up the top paper and scanned it. It was a wire transfer confirmation from Min-jun's private bank account. Every single month for the last 8 years, Min-jun had transferred $10,000 to a private medical facility in Seoul, South Korea. The recipient account was listed under the name Sun-hee. Maya gasped, dropping the paper as if it had burned her skin. 8 years. For 8 long years out of their 10-year marriage, her husband had been sending a fortune to a woman in Seoul. She opened the small notebook, flipping through pages filled with Min-jun's neat handwriting. Most of the entries were in Korean, but scattered throughout were dates, flight numbers, and notes written in English. One entry near the back caught her eye. It was written just 3 months ago, while Min-jun was already sick. It read, "I am running out of time. If Maya ever finds out, she will hate me, but I have to make sure they are safe. She deserves the truth, but the truth will break her heart." Tears streamed down Maya's cheeks, hot and bitter. She felt completely betrayed, utterly humiliated, and deeply lost. The man she thought was her devotion incarnate had been keeping a massive, expensive double life behind her back. But as she stared at the name Sun-hee, the anger inside her began to harden into a quiet, fierce determination. She was not going to sit in Atlanta and weep over a memory that was built on a lie. She needed to look this woman in the eye. She needed answers that only Seoul could provide. A few days later, Maya stepped off the plane at Incheon International Airport in Seoul. The crisp autumn air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the warm moisture of Atlanta. She felt completely out of her element in the bustling Korean metropolis, surrounded by a language she only partially understood and culture she had only experienced through her late husband. But she clung tightly to her handbag, where the bank statements and the address of the medical facility were safely tucked away. She checked into a modest hotel, barely sleeping a wink as she rehearsed what she would say when she finally confronted the woman who had shared her husband's life. The next morning, Maya took a taxi to the quiet outskirts of Seoul, stopping in front of a modest, highly secured private clinic surrounded by tall stone walls. Her heart pounded heavily in her chest as she walked through the sliding glass doors. The lobby was quiet, smelling strongly of antiseptic and fresh lilies. She walked up to the reception desk, her hands trembling as she pulled out the paper with the address and the name Sun-hee. "Excuse me," Maya said to the young receptionist, trying to keep her voice steady and polite. "I am looking for Sun-hee. I believe she is a patient here." The receptionist looked at the paper, then typed quickly into her computer. A look of confusion crossed the worker's face, followed by a sudden air of tension. She looked up at Maya, taking in her appearance, before picking up the phone and whispering frantically in Korean. Moments later, an older gentleman in a white doctor's coat emerged from a side hallway. He approached Maya with a grave expression, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and profound sympathy. "Are you Maya?" the doctor asked in smooth, accented English. Maya nodded, stepping forward. "Yes, I am Min-jun's wife. I need to know who Sun-hee is, and why my husband was sending her money for years. Please, I deserve to know the truth." The doctor let out a long, heavy sigh, looking around the lobby to ensure no one else was listening. "Min-jun spoke of you often, Maya. He loved you more than his own life. But you were never supposed to come here. What you are looking for is not what you think." "Then take me to her," Maya insisted, her eyes filling with desperate tears. "Please, doctor. I came all the way from America. I cannot live with this pain anymore." The doctor hesitated for a long moment, watching the heartbreak raw on Maya's face. Finally, he bowed his head slightly. "Very well. But prepare yourself. The truth in this room has been sleeping for a very long time." He turned and led her down a quiet, softly lit corridor toward a restricted wing of the hospital. Maya followed him, her breath catching in her throat with every step, completely unaware that the door she was about to open would blow apart everything she thought she knew about her husband, her marriage, and her own family. The doctor paused outside a heavy wooden door at the very end of the silent hallway. He turned to Maya, his eyes filled with a quiet, sorrowful caution. "Before you go in, you must understand something," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. "Min-jun did not come here out of betrayal. He came here out of duty to a debt that was never his to pay. Maya's chest tightened, a knot of confusion twisting inside her. What debt? What are you talking about? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Instead of answering, the doctor pushed the door open, allowing the soft amber light of the room to spill out into the corridor. Maya stepped inside, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She had prepared herself for anything, to see a beautiful young mistress, to see a second family, to see the ultimate proof of her husband's infidelity. But as her eyes adjusted to the warm light, her breath hitched in her throat. Lying in the center of the room was an elderly Korean woman, her body frail and small against the white sheets. She was hooked to a quiet, rhythmically humming monitor, her eyes closed in a deep, undisturbed sleep. There were no fresh flowers from a lover, no romantic cards, only a life support machine keeping her faint pulse steady. Maya stood frozen near the edge of the bed, her mind spinning in complete disorientation. "This is Sun-hee," the doctor said, walking up beside her. "She has been in a comatose state for nearly 9 years following a devastating hit-and-run accident. Min-jun paid for every single day of her care, her private room, and her medical team. He ensured she received the best treatment possible in all of South Korea." Maya stared at the sleeping woman, her eyes wide with shock. "But why?" she asked, turning to the doctor with tears streaming down her face. If she was not his lover, why would Min-jun spend a fortune to keep a comatose woman alive in secret for 8 years? Why didn't he just tell me? The doctor reached over to a small, dark wooden nightstand resting beside the hospital bed. On top of it sat a single, faded photograph in a simple silver frame. The doctor picked it up gently and handed it to Maya. "Look at this," he said quietly. This picture was the only personal item found in Sun-hee's belongings after her accident. Min-jun brought it here himself the day he moved her to this clinic. Maya took the frame with hands that shook so violently she nearly dropped it. She looked down at the old, slightly discolored photo. It showed a young Sun-hee smiling brightly under a blossoming cherry tree, her arm wrapped around the waist of a tall, handsome man in a United States military uniform. Maya's breath caught in her lungs, her eyes locking onto the man's face. The strong jawline, the kind smile, the deep eyes. She knew that face better than her own. It was a face that hung in a golden frame in her mother's living room back in Atlanta. "Dad?" Maya gasped, her voice breaking into a sob. She collapsed into the small armchair beside the bed, clutching the frame to her chest. "How is this possible? What was my father doing with this woman?" The doctor sat down across from her, his expression deeply sympathetic. "Your father was stationed here in Seoul decades ago, Maya. He and Sun-hee had a deep, beautiful love affair before he was suddenly reassigned back to the United States. What your father never knew, and what Sun-hee never had the chance to tell him, was that she was carrying his child when he left." The world seemed to stop spinning around Maya. She stared at the doctor, completely numb, as the pieces of a vast, tragic puzzle began to move into place. "A child?" she whispered. "My father had a child in Korea?" "Yes," the doctor replied gently. "A daughter. Sun-hee raised her alone in a quiet village outside the city, keeping your father's memory alive in her heart. But 9 years ago, when Sun-hee was struck by that car, the young girl was left completely alone in the world with no family, no money, and a mother who would never wake up again." Maya squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears spilling over her eyelashes as a profound wave of emotion washed over her. "And Min-jun? How did Min-jun find out?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. The doctor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a gentle, comforting tone. "Min-jun's family is very powerful, Maya. Years ago, before you two met, his father's company was involved in a land development project in Sun-hee's village. There was a tragic accident involving the construction company, an accident that Min-jun's family covered up to protect their business reputation. That accident was the hit-and-run that put Sun-hee in this coma." Maya gasped, covering her mouth in complete horror. "Min-jun's family did this to her?" The doctor nodded sadly. "Min-jun discovered the truth by accident shortly after he married you. When he investigated the company's old legal files, he realized 2 horrifying things. First, that his own family had ruined a woman's life and covered it up. And second, when he looked into Sun-hee's background, he discovered who her daughter was and who her daughter's father was. He realized that the woman lying in a comatose state was the mother of his beloved wife's half-sister. Maya felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces, but this time it was not from betrayal. It was from the overwhelming, crushing weight of her husband's love. Min-jun was carrying this whole time, she whispered, her chest heaving with deep, painful sobs. He carried his family's sin, my father's past, and my sister's future all on his own shoulders. He knew how much you loved your father's memory, the doctor said softly. He knew that revealing his family's crime would destroy you, tear apart his own family, and cause you unbearable pain. So he chose to bear the burden entirely in secret. He used his own personal fortune to ensure Sun-hee was cared for in the finest facility. And he made a promise to himself that he would protect your half-sister from afar, ensuring she never wanted for anything, while keeping her hidden from his own family's dangerous influence. A few days later, Maya stood outside a quiet university library in the heart of Seoul. The afternoon sun was warm, casting long, golden shadows across the stone courtyard. Her heart was beating fast, filled with an intense mixture of anxiety, hope, and deep love. She looked down at her hands, holding a small slip of paper with a name written on it, Un-ji. As she watched the students flowing out of the heavy glass doors, a young woman stepped into the sunlight. She had long, dark hair, warm brown skin, and the exact same kind eyes that Maya saw every time she looked in the mirror. Maya felt a sharp breath leave her chest as she stepped forward into the girl's path. Un-ji? Maya asked, her voice soft and trembling. The young woman stopped, looking at Maya with a polite, curious smile that slowly turned into utter shock as she took in Maya's face. Maya looked at her secret sister, the girl her dying husband had spent his last breath trying to protect. The truth had finally come to light, revealing a love so deep, so selfless, and so pure that it defied even death itself. Un-ji stood frozen on the stone steps of the university courtyard, her books clutched tightly against her chest. She stared at Maya, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and sudden, overwhelming recognition. For a long, silent moment, the bustling sounds of the campus seemed to fade into the background. "You look just like the photograph," Un-ji whispered, her voice trembling in soft, hesitant English. "The photograph on my mother's bedside table. You're Maya, aren't you?" Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she took a slow step closer, offering a gentle, reassuring smile. "Yes, Un-ji. I am Maya. I am your sister." Hearing the words spoken out loud caused Un-ji's composure to break instantly. A heavy sob escaped the young girl's lips, and without a second thought, she stepped forward and threw her arms around Maya's neck. Maya wrapped her arms tightly around her half-sister, holding her close as the warm Seoul breeze swept past them. In that tight embrace, years of hidden pain, solitude, and silence seemed to melt away between two women who had been connected by blood and protected by the same extraordinary man. A few hours later, the two sisters sat together in a quiet, cozy tea house tucked away in a historic neighborhood of Seoul. The soft aroma of green tea filled the air as they sat across from each other at a low wooden table. Maya reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Un-ji's trembling fingers. Min-jun spoke of someone waiting in Seoul before he took his last breath, Maya said softly, her eyes filled with deep tenderness. "I thought he meant another woman he loved. I thought my heart was broken forever. But now I realize he was talking about you." Un-ji wiped a tear from her cheek, looking down at her teacup before looking back into Maya's eyes with profound gratitude. "Min-jun was like an angel in my life, Maya. When my mother fell into that terrible coma 9 years ago, I was just a child. I had no money, no relatives, and nowhere to go. I thought I was going to starve on the streets. But then Min-jun appeared. He found me a safe place to live. He made sure my mother received the best medical care in the country, and he paid for every single year of my education. He made sure I never felt alone." "Did he ever tell you why he was doing all of it?" Maya asked gently, her voice thick with emotion. Eun-ji nodded slowly, a sad yet beautiful smile gracing her lips. He visited me twice a year, always very secretly. He never let his own family know he was helping me. One afternoon, when I asked him why he cared so much for a stranger, he pulled a small photo of you out of his wallet and showed it to me. He told me that his wife was the most precious person in his entire world. He said that my existence was a secret that could bring immense danger and sorrow to you if his family ever found out. He told me he was protecting both of us. He said, I am carrying the weight of my family's past so that my wife can live in peace, and so that you can have a future. Maya squeezed her eyes shut as fresh tears slipped down her face. Every single month of their marriage, while she had been building a home with him in Atlanta, Min-jun had been quietly, heroically protecting two families at once. He had carried the shameful crime of his own traditional family, the tragic secret of Maya's father, and the financial responsibility of a sleeping mother and a growing girl, all while never letting a single drop of that stress touch Maya's life. His final whisper in that cold ICU room was not a confession of betrayal. It was a desperate, loving handoff of responsibility. He was begging his wife to take care of the sister she never knew she had. Later that evening, Maya and Eun-ji walked through the glowing streets of Seoul together, stopping at a small noodle shop to share a quiet meal. For the first time in 9 long years, Eun-ji laughed freely, sharing stories about her studies, her dreams of becoming an architect, and the life she had built. Maya listened intently, feeling a warm, blooming sense of purpose replacing the cold ache of grief in her heart. She realized that Min-jun's love had not ended with his death. It had left behind a living legacy in the form of a sister she now adored. As they finished their meal, Maya looked at Eun-ji with a thoughtful, decisive look in her eyes. Eun-ji, I know your mother is still cared for here in the clinic, but you do not have to stay in the city alone anymore. Your father was my father. You are my family now. Min-jun protected you from afar, but I want to protect you by my side. Come back to Atlanta with me. Let me help you finish your education, and let us build a real family together. Eun-ji's eyes widened with emotion, her lips trembling as she stared at Maya. You would really do that for me? You do not resent me for the secrets my existence brought into your marriage? Maya smiled warmly, reaching across the table to hold Eun-ji's hands. Min-jun loved both of us with everything he had. Resenting you would mean misunderstanding the greatest act of love my husband ever performed. You are my sister, Eun-ji. We belong together. A few days later, Maya returned to the private clinic one last time before making her travel arrangements. She walked into the quiet room where Sun-hee lay sleeping under the warm amber lights. Maya walked up to the side of the bed, gently picking up the old photograph of her father and Sun-hee. She set it back down, then leaned over and softly smoothed the blanket over the sleeping woman's shoulders. Rest peacefully, Maya whispered softly into the quiet room. Min-jun took care of your daughter, and now I will take her the rest of the way. Your secret is safe, and your daughter will never be alone again. As Maya walked out of the clinic into the bright morning sunshine, she felt lighter than she had in months. The shadow of suspicion and betrayal was completely gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of pride for the man she had married. But as she pulled out her phone to book 2 tickets back to Atlanta, her screen lit up with a notification. It was a high-priority email from Mr. Park, Min-jun's personal attorney in Atlanta. Maya opened the message, and her breath caught in her throat as she read the urgent words displayed on the screen. Maya, you need to return immediately, the email read. Min-jun's family has filed a lawsuit to freeze all of his assets and claim his entire estate, alleging that your marriage was invalid. They have discovered that he was sending money to Seoul, and they are preparing to destroy his reputation and yours. You must come home now. Maya's hands shook as she stared at the screen, realizing that her husband's ruthless family was ready to wage war on his memory, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Maya stared at her phone screen, the cold breeze of Seoul brushing against her cheeks, but inside her, a fierce fire ignited. For years, she had stepped back, allowing Min-jun's family to treat her with cold disdain out of respect for her husband's desire for peace. But Min-jun was no longer here to bear their burdens, and she was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for his honor, for his legacy, and for the bright future of the sister standing right beside her. She turned to Eun-ji, whose eyes were filled with sudden worry as she noticed the dramatic shift in Maya's posture. "Is everything okay, Maya?" Eun-ji asked softly. Maya looked at her sister, her jaw set with absolute resolve. "Everything is going to be fine, Eun-ji, but our fight is just beginning. Pack your bags. We are going home to Atlanta, and we are going to finish what Min-jun started." A few days later, the high-rise glass doors of the prestigious law firm in downtown Atlanta swung open. Inside the grand boardroom, Min-jun's family sat at the long mahogany table, surrounded by a team of high-powered corporate lawyers. Min-jun's father sat at the head of the table, his face stern, arrogant, and unyielding, flanked by Min-jun's brothers. They looked completely confident, fully expecting the quiet black daughter-in-law they had always looked down upon to surrender under the pressure of their immense wealth and influence. Mr. Park, Min-jun's personal attorney, sat at the opposite side of the table, looking pale and overwhelmed. As the heavy wooden door opened, every head in the room turned. Maya walked into the room with unshakable grace, wearing a tailored navy suit, her head held high. But she did not walk in alone. Walking right beside her was Eun-ji, dressed impeccably, holding a leather briefcase. Min-jun's father scowled, leaning forward with deep irritation. "Maya, this is a private family legal matter regarding my late son's estate," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no right to bring strangers into this boardroom. You will sign the release papers for the assets, or we will drag your name through the mud and expose your husband's secret double life in Korea." Maya did not flinch. She took her seat at the table, while Eun-ji stood tall beside her, placing the briefcase on the polished wood. "My husband did not have a disgraceful double life," Maya said, her voice calm, clear, and ringing with absolute authority. "But your family certainly did." Before the family's lead lawyer could object, Maya signaled to Mr. Park, who opened the briefcase and laid out a thick stack of certified documents across the table. Min-jun's father looked down at the papers, and his arrogant expression instantly crumbled into a look of sheer terror. Spread across the table were original police reports, private investigation files, and bank records from 9 years ago detailing the exact construction company hit-and-run that had put Sun-hee into a comatose state, complete with the wire transfers paid out by the family's conglomerate to cover up the crime. Maya leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Min-jun's father with piercing intensity. "Min-jun spent 8 years paying for your sin out of his own pocket," she said, her voice dropping to a powerful whisper that held the entire room spellbound. "He carried your shame so that your family name wouldn't fall into ruin. He kept his silence to protect the people he loved. But he left every single piece of evidence in Mr. Park's hands, with explicit instructions that if you ever tried to strip his estate from me, the entire world would learn the truth about what you did in that village." The room fell into a suffocating, dead silence. Min-jun's brothers stared at their father in absolute horror as the legal reality of what they were facing hit them. Their lead attorney quickly scanned the documents, leaned down, and whispered frantically into the father's ear. The old man's face turned completely pale, his hands trembling as he realized he had been entirely outmaneuvered by the very woman he had spent a decade despising. Maya stood up slowly, placing her hands flat on the table. "You will withdraw your lawsuit immediately. You will leave Min-jun's legacy untouched. And you will never, ever step foot into my life or my sister's life again." Min-jun's father looked up at Eun-ji, finally recognizing the faint resemblance to the woman his company had tried to erase years ago. Crushed under the weight of his own exposed dark past, he gave a slow, defeated nod to his lawyers. Later that evening, Maya and Eun-ji stood in the quiet backyard of Maya's home in Atlanta. The night sky was clear, filled with twinkling stars. The air was cool and peaceful. Maya looked up at the moon, feeling a deep, profound sense of warmth wrapping around her heart. The pain of loss was still there, but the agonizing sting of betrayal had completely vanished, replaced by an everlasting appreciation for a love that was truly unconditional. Min-jun had loved her so deeply that he was willing to be misunderstood in death just to protect her heart and life. He had turned what could have been a story of tragedy and deceit into a bridge that reunited two sisters across the world. Sometimes, the things in life that look like the ultimate betrayal are actually immense sacrifices carried in the dark. We often judge moments by their immediate pain, forgetting that true love doesn't always shout its devotion. Sometimes, it suffers in quiet silence just to keep the ones it holds dear safe and whole. Grief can cloud our vision, but when we have the courage to search for the truth, we often find that love was there all along, working quietly in the shadows. What would you have done if you were in Maya's shoes? Would you have boarded that plane to Seoul to search for answers, or would you have walked away from the pain? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. I love reading your perspectives and connecting with every single one of you. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional journey with us. And don't stop here. Click the video showing on your screen right now to watch another powerful, heart-wrenching story on our channel. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.